Every once in a while, a cultural phenomenon can stop the world in its tracks and capture everyone's attention. In 2016, it was Pokemon Go that had people running through the streets worldwide, looking for digital Charizards on their phones. The Harlem Shake had people doing an elaborate dance for internet points in 2013. In 2011, people were planking, or laying flat across objects and taking pictures of themselves doing it. And for a couple years in the mid-2000s, everyone was picking up plastic guitar controllers and shredding to their parents' favorite rock songs on Guitar Hero. What started as an indie game collaboration between two small companies, one whose games had struggled to achieve commercial success, and another whose founders were literally mortgaging their houses to pay for this crazy idea, turned into something so commercially and critically successful that it transcended both the music and video game industries. It was getting made fun of on South Park, referenced in Vince Vaughn movies and Mariah Carey music videos, and played by Ellen DeGeneres on her show. I'll tell the story of Guitar Hero in this video, but as an artist and someone who talks about music on here, I also want to focus on what it was like for the artists who had their music in the games. For the legacy acts, did it lead to a second win in their career and a new wave of younger fans excited to dig into their old catalog? Or was it just a check? For the lesser known artists that the developers included, did it help launch a career? Or was it a classic I'll pay you an exposure situation where the artist just kinda got exploited? And for the past's future artists, did Guitar Hero lead to them picking up a guitar? Or did the ease of the game make kids not want to push through on mastering an instrument with a steeper learning curve than 5 colored buttons? Let's dive in. Guitar Hero was not the first guitar controller-based music rhythm video game. The genre had existed in Japan for almost a decade before Guitar Hero was ever released. Guitar Freaks, a series developed by Konami, had already been a hit in Japan. It was first on the System 573, which was an arcade hardware system made by Konami for their series of Bee-Nami music video games. The name Bee-Nami might not ring a bell by itself, but the most popular series under that name, Dance Dance Revolution, probably does. A few of the Guitar Freaks games were ported over to the PlayStation, like the PS1, where they came with a controller that looks a lot like the Guitar Hero controller but with 3 colored buttons instead of 5. A big difference between the Guitar Freaks games and the Guitar Hero games was the music that you could play in them. In Guitar Freaks, it was mostly original music made just for the games, so while the gameplay was fun and similar to a lot of the other Guitar Hero games, for it to succeed on a mainstream level in the United States, the music was gonna have to change. And it was an unlikely pair of two brothers who came up with that vision. Red Octane was founded by Charles and Kai Huang. They were first running an online video game rental service known as Web Game Zone, which was kind of like what Netflix used to be before they were the streaming service that owns everything. You would pay to rent a video game for a week or so, and then they would mail it to you, you'd play it, and then you'd mail it back to them and pick a new one. This IGN article from the year 2000 talks about how they were expanding their service to include import games, especially those from Japan. According to a 2008 interview that they did with the Cleveland Plain Dealer, it was while the brothers were operating Web Game Zone when they noticed how popular all these Japanese music rhythm games were. Dance Dance Revolution, there was a drum one called Drum Mania. All of these games required some kind of special controller, be it a floor pad for Dance Dance Revolution, a guitar for Guitar Freaks, or a drum set for Drum Mania. And of course, fighting and racing game enthusiasts sometimes prefer their own special controllers for their respective genres as well. So the brothers pivoted their company and started making controllers for the American consumers who wanted to play these Japanese games. The first product they had was a dance pad for the Dance Dance Revolution games. If you're enjoying the video so far, I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. I'm a pretty new channel. If you want to see all my videos early, go to my Instagram, HADJI Gaviota, and join my broadcast channel where I post all my videos one day early. Appreciate y'all. Back to the video. Those dance pads that Red Octane were making, they were a hit. But there was a limit on how successful their company could be because the Dance Dance Revolution games were still only available in Japan. So people had to rent them or buy the Japanese copy and then buy the controller from Red Octane. It was a pretty small pool of customers. Konami at this time was still questioning whether they wanted to bring the Dance Dance Revolution series stateside. They weren't really sure what the market was going to look like. So the Red Octane brothers realized that they couldn't really rely on Konami, and the best step for them to take was to start publishing games like that themselves. They had the resources to make the controllers, they just needed an idea for a game, and a partner on the software side to make that game. They found some arcade dance games that were already in the US and tried to make controllers for those, but the issue was those games just weren't very popular. Dance video games became a lot more popular in the United States towards the end of the 2000s, when the Wii came out and people started playing Just Dance like crazy. In the early to mid 2000s, it hadn't really caught on as a thing. They needed something that worked better for their audience. So they started to ponder the potential for the American game consumer in the rhythm music world. As they sat there thinking about what the average American would want to be in a video game, they settled on one idea: the rock star. And so they hatched the idea for Guitar Hero. Essentially, they said, what if we take the guitar gameplay from Guitar Freak, but set it to some of the guitar music that Americans, or honestly like people worldwide, love? They reached out to a company called Harmonix about developing the game. Harmonix was founded by a duo named Alex Rigopoulos, Greece mentioned, and Aaron Igozi, who were students at MIT. Alex was a music major who liked computers, and Aaron was a computer major who liked music. So they were a match made in heaven. They started Harmonix to make music-related computer software, and eventually it evolved into video game development. They were approached by Sony to make the music rhythm game Frequency, which was a critical success but not a commercial one, which they chalked up to the soundtrack. After Frequency and its sequel Amplitude, which had a similar fate, if not a little bit more critically successful, they were approached by Konami to take their Karaoke Revolution game and adapt it for a Western audience. They released 3 of these games in a 2-year span from 2003 to 2004. And these games were more successful than Frequency or Amplitude, probably because they had soundtracks with mainstream music. The first Karaoke Revolution had smash hits like Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, Complicated by Avril Lavigne, and Girls Just Wanna Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper, amongst many others. Harmonix was the perfect partner for Red Octane on the Guitar Hero project. They had the musical knowledge, the experience creating critically acclaimed music games with engaging gameplay, and the foresight to know that if their game was going to succeed, they were going to need to put the right music in it. So they set out to explain the concept to some potential investors. But at first, people were not buying it. And why would they? As Harmonix CEO Alex Rigopoulos told Vice, peripheral-based games were never commercially successful, at least in the US. Music games have never been commercially successful, at least in the US. So you marry one genre that's never successful with another genre that's never successful. It's like, that's not a recipe for success. If you make a regular console video game, you can sell just the disc for, well, back then it was $49.99, now it's closer to like $69.99. But if you're making a game with a special controller, a guitar controller, you gotta bake that price in too. Now you're asking the consumer to buy this thing with no track record for $20 more than another game that they would buy. It's a tough sell, but the two companies both believed in the idea and they kept pushing. Red Octane gave Harmonix a budget of $1.75 million, which is both a lot of money for a small company run by two brothers to put up themselves, and also not a lot of money to develop a video game with for the other company. But once they started developing the game, people at the company were quickly realizing that it was really fun and engaging, even in the black and white prototype. They knew they had something good in their hands, but the uphill battle was just beginning. And one of the biggest issues was getting songs into the game. For something like Guitar Hero to be fun and enjoyable to most people, it needed to have songs that they knew and loved, so that they could feel like the rock stars that they grew up watching, or maybe that their parents grew up watching. But of course, it's not easy to just go up to a legendary rock star, some of whom aren't even alive, and ask them to put their song in the game. Even after getting in contact with some of the original artists, many said no because the game didn't have a track record, and they didn't want their name to be associated with something that might just look ridiculous. Even for the ones who are open to the idea, you can't just take a song and slap it into a video game. There are a lot of complex legalities involved with getting music placed in a video game or a movie or a TV show or a commercial. In the music industry, these placements are called sync placements. Artists are paid for these, and sometimes a pretty penny. Putting a song into a commercial, traditionally, you would pay the songwriters a fee, and then they would also collect royalties based on how much the commercial runs. That money is called the back end. So the issue with Guitar Hero is licensing songs can be really expensive. Well, licensing the original master is expensive. Let's do a quick breakdown of the music industry side of all this because I think it can be really confusing even for people who make music and put it out. When a song is created, there are 2 different parts to its ownership. The songwriting credits are broken down and divided between everybody who wrote the song, both the music and the lyrics. The other part of the ownership is the master, and that's whoever played on the actual recording that's released. So for example, let's look at one of my songs, the most recent one being Fiji. I wrote the lyrics and I played the keyboard parts. My friend Andrew played the guitar, my friend Rome played the bass, and my friend Chetta produced it and played the drums. All of us are in the songwriting credits. For the master, because all of us played on the actual recorded version that I released, those credits are the same. Artists are paid out of both halves of the ownership. I get monthly royalties that are generated by people listening to my music on streaming services from the master side. And then I get quarterly payments from BMI, which is the company that handles my publishing. And that comes from the songwriter side. If people were buying my single in stores on iTunes, I would get those payments on the master side. If my song was getting played on the radio, I would get those royalties from the songwriter side. Make sense? Probably not. Welcome to the life of a musician. So we can compare my song to a popular cover song. The first one that came to mind was Put Your Records On by Rit Momney, which is a cover of that Corinne Bailey Rae song, Put Your Records On. It went viral on TikTok a couple years ago. So if you check the credits on Spotify of both songs, you can see that the writing credits are the same on each, but the producer is different. And that makes sense because the two versions were produced by different people. So on the songwriting side, like the radio, all of those proceeds would go to Corinne Bailey Rae, even if people are playing the Rit Momney version. But on the master side, when people listen on streaming services, then Rit Momney is probably keeping at least a portion of that. So to put songs in Guitar Hero, Red Octane and Harmonix had to ask the original writers of the song for permission to use them. But the thing is, if you want to license a huge song, that fee is going to be like exorbitant, like just not even payable for a small company like these guys. But that's if you're licensing the original master. What many people do when they want a particular song to be playing, but they can't afford to license the big giant hit song that they're trying to license, they license a cover version. Many musicians will make cover versions particularly for this sake, and then they license those versions for much cheaper than somebody would pay for the real thing. There's a whole industry of musicians who make cover songs specifically for sync, for TV, for movies, for commercials, and for video games like Guitar Hero. So since the first Guitar Hero was on such a small budget, after they secured the licenses for the songs that they wanted to use, they hired a company called Wave Group Sound to produce covers for all of the songs that they licensed. Now that might sound expensive too. It was about $10,000 a track, but believe it or not, that's like 1/5 of what it would have cost to license some of these other songs. These also weren't slouches. They hired some really accomplished musicians like the guitarist Marcus Henderson. Well, it may have been because I was like 10 years old the first time I played Guitar Hero. I honestly never realized that the songs were covers. But when I look back at some older video game forums or even like some Reddit posts about the game, like some people are making fun of the quality of the covers, so I know that maybe for people with a trained ear, they knew. As a kid though, I was completely fooled. By the time the game came out in 2005, they had only $30,000 left to spend on marketing. So they employed a strategy that could be best described as going up to people and saying, please, 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 please. They emailed and begged video game industry people to check it out because they knew the product was good. All they needed was somebody to play it. Finally, Tal Blevins, the co-founder of IGN, agreed and checked it out. And he was like, yeah, this is awesome. So word quickly spread about the game. It sold like crazy. They couldn't even come close to producing the number of units that the world wanted from them. They did $45 million in sales in just the first 2 months. Guitar Hero 2 was an even bigger hit. And after that, the big industry came sniffing around. Activision bought Red Octane for $100 million and kept the intellectual property for Guitar Hero, eventually going on to make Guitar Hero 3, 4, and 5, and whatever they have going on now. Meanwhile, Harmonix was bought by Viacom, which is the company that owns MTV, for $175 million. They went on to create a competitor, Rock Band, that added other instruments, microphones, drums, and the bass guitar. Eventually though, the hype for the music rhythm video game died down and people just kind of moved on to the next thing. This is a bit of an oversimplification, and there is plenty of fascinating lore in the story of Guitar Hero after the first boom. Two companies that were once friendly collaborators were pitted against each other, making competitor products. There was corporate drama, there were lawsuits, and there was just utter collapse and financial ruin. But this video isn't just meant to be an oral history of Guitar Hero. What I want to look at is what it was like for the musicians involved. It was impossible for Guitar Hero to change the lives of already established legacy acts, like Ozzy Osbourne or the Red Hot Chili Peppers. These guys are so rich, they probably barely noticed that check hit their account. However, Guitar Hero had a marked impact on their success within a new generation. The co-founder of Red Octane, Charles Wang, was quoted as saying that retailers told him that downloads for songs and CDs increased 200% after appearing in the game. While mom and dad may have already had these albums on CD or cassette or vinyl, their children were now invested too. And younger people were buying music on the internet in the mid-2000s, believe it or not. That feels like ages ago. At first, the big time acts were probably scoffing at the idea of these children picking up these chunky plastic controllers and chugging along to covers of their classic songs. It's kind of a ridiculous image. If you lived in the world pre-Guitar Hero, you see why companies weren't immediately throwing money at the idea. But after the first game was a smash hit, bands were buying in. In some way, the table completely turned, and Guitar Hero was the one in the driver's seat. Bands were hoping that their songs would get added so that they would see a boost in their popularity and reach a new audience. For Guitar Hero 3, The Sex Pistols even went Taylor Swift mode and re-recorded their song Anarchy in the UK specifically for the game. No old band, especially one where at least one of the guys was dead at the time, and they probably don't like each other anymore, would go through the trouble of re-recording a song just for fun or because they liked video games. They saw it as an opportunity. Aerosmith saw so much of an opportunity that they went and made their own entire expansion pack with Guitar Hero. According to the former CEO of Activision, Bobby Kotick, Aerosmith made more money off that Guitar Hero game than any of their studio albums. I don't know if that says more about the game's success or how messed up the music industry is, but I digress. But Guitar Hero wasn't just made up of old legacy acts and rock classics. In every Guitar Hero game, starting with the first one, Harmonix included tracks from smaller artists as unlockable bonus tracks. One of those tracks in the first Guitar Hero game was All of This by a band Seamus. Two of the band's members were actually employees at Harmonix before moving to LA to pursue their music career in 2004. Their first album, Paper Sun, actually wasn't even out at the time of the release of Guitar Hero. So they created a buzz with some people going on the internet and asking, hey, where can I listen to this song, All of This? Well, I wouldn't say that Seamus ever really blew up. They had a successful career with some cool opportunities with doors that probably were open from that Guitar Hero look. They were able to license that first album to MTV and eventually got a publishing deal which placed them in TV shows like One Tree Hill. Their song Like a Fool from their second album was put in Harmonix's later game Rock Band 2. They even got to play a fictional on-screen band in the 2011 thriller movie The Roommate. An interview they did online in 2009 talks a lot about how Guitar Hero helped, detailing how that first placement really pushed the demand for their album. Looking at the Seamus Spotify page today, their numbers are modest, and if you check out the playlists that they're discovered on, they're mostly Guitar Hero or One Tree Hill related. But that's not surprising given that their entire career arc played out before streaming services became the big thing. The song that's in Guitar Hero, All of This, still has over 1 million plays and is almost 5 times as many plays as any of the other songs that they have. As a company that made music-related video games, it's not surprising that the guys from Seamus weren't the only musicians at Harmonix. Most of the bonus tracks in Guitar Hero came from bands that had Harmonix employees in them. Casson Crooker, who was the audio director at Harmonix during the time that they made the first Guitar Hero, was in a band called Freeze Pop that had their song Get Ready to Rock included as a bonus track in the original Guitar Hero, and their song Less Talk More Rock was in Guitar Hero 2 as well. He described the ensuing phenomenon in the Vice interview. There was this shift at shows where instead of autographing CDs, people were bringing their Guitar Hero guitars to the shows. And we would play the Guitar Hero songs from Guitar Hero 1 and Guitar Hero 2, and there were people like holding their hands up in the air and playing the gem patterns, like air guitaring the gem patterns, while we were playing the song. Probably the most infamous example of a song's popularity being owed to Guitar Hero is Through the Fire and the Flames by Dragon Force, which is widely considered to be the hardest level in Guitar Hero 3. It's a raging metal track that has achieved mythical status due to how hard it is to play both in Guitar Hero and in real life. The legend of the song spread so rapidly from the game that the song actually peaked at number 86 on the Billboard Hot 100. This is a power metal song. This is not like some pop music. Like, this is crazy. It's certified platinum in the United States. For a video game to take a power metal track all the way to the Billboard Hot 100 is astounding. With the exception of some popular bands like Metallica, metal does not really scrape the Hot 100 charts, especially not in the 2000s. Herman Lee from Dragon Force went on TikTok in 2022 to talk about the experience of having his song in Guitar Hero. I would play the video, but the background music might mess this video up, so I'm just gonna paraphrase. He said he was only paid a one-time fee for using the song, and it was only around $3,000 before it was broken down between all the band members and the stakeholders. That's not a lot. But the financial gains surely came when the song sold over 1 million singles, something that for a power metal song is very unlikely to happen without the influence of Guitar Hero. Like he said in the TikTok, this type of music doesn't make it onto the radio very often, so getting that exposure was probably actually really valuable. I know there's like a I'll pay you an exposure meme, and that's still valid like 99% of the time that you ask an artist to do something for exposure, but this might be the 1% where it was actually worth it. It doesn't sound like Herman Lee is particularly bitter about that one-off fee being kind of low. He seems like a pretty smart guy who is aware that the situation helped fund their career, and Dragon Force is still going strong to this day. Using the Seamus, Freeze Pop, and Dragon Force examples, it's fascinating to imagine what the Guitar Hero craze would have looked like in the streaming and social media age that we're in today. older rock songs could have boomed to the top of the charts. With the way streaming works, the virality of the songs would have been easier to quantify. Maybe some legacy artists would have even capitalized on the momentum and re-recorded their old songs and released them in the way that Taylor Swift does. And newer acts could have capitalized on their appearance in the game through social media and online word of mouth. Obviously, the internet existed at the time in the mid-2000s, but trust me, it was a very different internet than the one we have today. You really had to be there. Things were a bit slower. I think it would have been a bit easier for artists to capitalize on that moment if it happened right now. The hardest to quantify, but perhaps the most important impact that the Guitar Hero series had, is the influence it had on younger kids moving towards rock and guitar-based music, as listeners or as creators of that kind of music. There were articles in CNN in 2008 about Lars Ulrich, one of the members of Metallica, bonding with his 10-year-old son over guitar music that the younger Ulrich was introduced to by the video games Guitar Hero. Activision themselves used a stat that they got from Guitar Center that claimed guitar sales were up 27% in 2007. They rattled off a few more stats, including that 2/3 of players who hadn't played a real instrument were planning on trying one, and 3/4 of players who were already musicians were going to commit to playing more. These stats are kind of bunk if we're being real though. Ask anyone with an instrument if they're planning on practicing more in the near future and they're going to be like, of course. But I can tell you myself, as a guitar player who needs to practice a lot more, it's not always true. So I'm not going to read too much into those last two statistics, but I will say that the increased sales in guitars is fascinating and really crazy. The question is, did any of those kids go on to use those guitars for good? The highest profile example is Post Malone, who has claimed on multiple occasions that he played a lot of Guitar Hero as a 12-year-old and then decided, hey, I guess the next step is to get really good at the real thing. I'm buying this story especially because Post Malone's history as a gamer is well documented. And like him or not, he's definitely a successful and an influential artist. Trolling through the internet will show you plenty of people who are self-describing as going down that same path. For me, I also got a guitar after playing Guitar Hero. The skill doesn't really translate though. In fact, I actually play the real guitar left-handed and I played Guitar Hero right-handed. I'm left-handed in real life, but I probably didn't know that there was a left-handed setting in Guitar Hero the first time I played it. I'm not a crazy guitarist now or anything, and I'd actually asked my parents for a guitar before I ever played Guitar Hero, but they wanted me to start on the piano, which I'm very thankful for now, but I didn't understand as a kid. But I can definitely say that Guitar Hero only furthered my desire to play guitar. I wonder if we'll ever see something like these games again. The intersection of two of my loves, the video game industry and the music industry, colliding and sitting at the forefront of pop culture. There is still a thriving community of people who play Guitar Hero online. And in a funny, full circle kind of way, the game is now available in a lot of arcades like Dave & Buster's, just like the original Japanese inspiration was. A lot of people on the internet ask if we'll ever see a comeback of the franchise, to which I'd say there's still a pretty strong community of people playing and modding the game and keeping it alive, and for most video game series, that's not the case. I don't think that the perfect storm of worldwide attention could ever happen again. But I think most of the artists involved in that first boom, young and old, can smile when they think about it. And so do we when we think about the Guitar Hero era, don't we? It was a simpler time.